Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andy, Bruce, and Jamaica. They're wonderful. Thank you. I'm so blessed to have our Wednesday night music team. So I don't know what it is about Wednesday night talks, but every time I always feel that there's something that I need to confess to or admit. And tonight I'm just going to get it off my chest right off the bat, because what I have to admit to you, it has to do with the actual talk title. So my talk title tonight is the Transformative Power of Self-Love. Now, as some of you may know, we are currently doing a series on Roger Teal's book. It's a wonderful book. It's called This Life is Joy. And we're taking kind of chapter by chapter. And oftentimes when I have a chapter that I'm going to focus on, I just make the title of the talk the same as the chapter. Easy, right? But when I saw the title of this chapter that I'm going to focus on tonight is This Conflict is Forgiveness. Ooh, this conflict is forgiveness. I've got to give a whole talk about conflict and the F word. No, thank you. I don't want it. So as I was reading it, I really began to see that Roger Teal has a wonderful gift in this idea of forgiveness and how it has to do with self-love. So we're going to explore that tonight. Because the thing about forgiveness, and my only resistance to talking about it, of course I know it's a wonderful thing, but I'm guessing that there's not one person in this room or watching this online that doesn't already know that, right? We're told from the time we were tiny that forgiveness is the right thing to do. And oftentimes embedded in that idea of that it's the right thing to do, it's also assumed that it's something that we do for someone else, that we draw upon our own strength and it's subtractive from us and we are giving it to someone else. Or on the other hand, if we've done something wrong, maybe we find ourselves needing to go ask that same forgiveness from someone else. Now, if you've been blessed enough to find a spiritual path such as Unity or any other spiritual path that really invites you to look inward to your own experience on how your own thoughts are helping create the way that you experience life, then you've also probably heard the teaching that forgiveness isn't so much really even about that other person, right? It's more about we forgive to create our own sense of freedom within ourselves. So that I can get a little tempted by, more freedom for myself. And yet, and hang in here with me, I kind of look at it the same way I do cauliflower. You see, I know that cauliflower is good for me, right? I know that eating a plate full of cauliflower versus a whole plate full of pizza is probably better for myself, will create more freedom, definitely create more freedom in my pant size, right? And yet, I really don't like eating it. And while I have the opportunity to say so, I'll say that I resent how cauliflower is pretending to be so many other things. Rice, mashed potatoes, crackers is showing up everywhere, right? But this talk title, this Transformative Power of Self-Love, isn't about tricking you the same way cauliflower tries to trick us into thinking it's pizza crust. It's more about the fact that we might not always think of the idea of self-love in terms of conflict and forgiveness. So we're going to explore tonight how we can actually use conflict and the feeling that we do need to forgive, and even our resistance against that, how we can use that as a portal into a greater experience of self-love. And so to begin, I want to talk with you about a couple of types of ways that we tend to deal with conflict. And I say we, and I kind of mean I. And so there are beautiful, healthy ways we deal with conflict. And then sometimes there are ways that we think we're dealing with it, but not so much peace comes about from this. And tonight I'm going to call them the two I'm going to focus on are burying, and burrowing. I can say it, I promise. So I'm going to start with burying, because this is one that I happen to be an expert at, right? So when we bury conflict, this is when we pretend that it doesn't exist. Something has shown up in our experience and caused an upset. We don't like what we're seeing. Maybe somebody said something that offends us or accused us of something. And so my tendency has been in the past, I've done this and I still do it occasionally, I don't like that. I don't like any tension. So instead of facing it, I try to escape from it as quickly as possible, pretend it doesn't exist. Because if I say how I'm feeling in the moment and it becomes confrontational, there's a fear there, right, of not being accepted or being rejected further. So when we have that fear and we let that run our experience of conflict, because we're already upset, but we're not willing to admit it, and we try to bury it, something happens. Well, first of all, let me say this about burying too, that is there's an extra danger for us spiritual types, if you consider, because the mind can come in and almost spiritualize this burying, because the mind might come in and say, oh, you're not really upset about that. You meditate. Oh, you don't need to let anybody know that you're not happy about that, because we need to keep things happy, 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 positive, positive, joy, 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 right? So the thing, though, about burying this upset, about burying this need to express yourself and not feeling like you're able to in that moment of conflict, is that we never bury things as deep as we think we need to. And what I mean by that is just a quick little rain and everything kind of comes up to the surface. And there's an easy little test I can tell you that I use for myself to tell whether I've buried something or if I've actually turned the other cheek and am not harboring any resentment. And that's if when I'm in a group of people and we're talking, maybe a meeting at work or with friends, or if I see this person coming down the hall, if I hear this person's name mentioned in conversation, how do I react? I check in with my body. Do I feel clenching in my gut? Maybe tingling in my head, maybe my heart's beating faster, right? Maybe there's a thought, abort, go away, maybe a need to talk about something that this person's done so that other people know, hey, they're really not that great. You should have heard what they said to me, right? If there are any of these thoughts or feelings that do not feel friendly or peaceful towards yourself or that other person, then that may be a sign that you've buried it. And we'll talk about what we can do with this burying after we talk about another favorite of mine, and that is burrowing. And I like the word burrow because the word burrow is a noun and a verb. So you can picture animals like moles and rabbits, they burrow down in the ground. That's the activity of making their home, but their hole that they create, that they decide to live in, is also called a burrow, right? And so I don't know about any of you, but I'm guessing that occasionally in your life, I know I've just burrowed on down with conflict. Somebody's done something I don't like. I'm not willing to forgive. I'm not willing to look at what it means, but I'm just gonna sit and stew in it. And then the other thing you can do is you can invite other people down into your little hole and tell them the same story about what so-and-so did or how this person's got you mad or they should be behaving differently. And sometimes the people that you invite down in there with you, they'll agree with you. And that feels really good when you get somebody to agree with the way that you see it. And sometimes they won't agree with you, and guess what? Then you just kick them out of the hole, and it's all good, right? So you don't have to put up with it. So the seductive nature of being in that burrowing down with conflict, of telling that same story, is that the mind will keep that story going, and not only does the mind keep the story going, it has no idea that it has created one version of the story as truth itself. And so the longer you spend with that story, the longer you spend down there in the burrow with your little burrow friends agreeing with you about it, the longer you believe that this is the ultimate truth of what happened, and you kind of remain stuck in that little burrow. And so the danger of burying or burrowing, and you might see yourself in either one of those from time to time, or there may be other ways that you notice that you tend to deal with things that when a conflict arises, when something happens that you don't like, when something feels threatening. The danger of either burying or burrowing or some of the other things we do, resisting, pushing away, that's kind of like burying, is that it keeps us from truly experiencing peace. But not only that, the conflict itself has a beautiful, holy gift for us. And if we're not willing to take it out and examine it and see what this feeling is about, what this cause of us wanting to go bury or burrow, then we don't even receive the gift. And so Roger Teal talks about the idea of it being a gift of self-love. And let me just talk a little bit more about burrowing, because there's a story I want to share with you about it that I first heard from Eckhart Tolle in one of his books. And it's about two Buddhist monks. And I love this story because it's a perfect example of what our minds can do. So these two Buddhist monks, they were on a walk of nobility together. They had taken the oath of silence for this walk, and it was going to be a walk of several hours, and they were going to cross many villages. And as they're walking, they come to a particular village where the road is a little bit muddy. And they see a young woman on the side of the road, and she has a long, beautiful kimono on. And she's trying to cross over the muddy road, but she's unable to without dragging her kimono through the mud. So the older monk rushes over, scoops the young woman up, picks her up, and puts her down on the other side of the road, and on they go. So the monks walk for about 4 or 5 more hours in silence, holding their holy silence. And around the time they're about to reach their destination, the younger monk looks at the older monk and says, "You know, that was really inappropriate what you did back there. We monks have taken a vow not to even touch a woman. You picked a woman up and put her down. That was so inappropriate." And the older monk looked at the younger one and said, "Oh, have you been carrying her this whole time? I put her down hours ago." So you see, that's the way that the mind, this was that one action in time, and the mind keeps it going and going and going and going. And I'm guessing that this has happened for you, that something has happened. It may have taken a moment in time that it happened, but how many moments do we spend in the burrow with it, right? So I do this myself. And I think that it's not about never doing this when we have conflict, never burying, never burrowing. It's a realization I am human. At times, I am going to resist conflict. At times, I'm going to make up a story about something and then believe it. And it's at the cost of my own peace. It's at the cost of my own freedom. And so when we look at that, it's not to make judgments about ourselves doing that, but it's about the opportunity to look at that we have a choice in this. Because there's a beautiful thing that begins to happen when we catch ourselves burying or burrowing. There's a wonderful moment. It doesn't always feel so wonderful, but this happens. All of a sudden, we might be in the midst of thinking someone should have done something, somebody didn't do something they were supposed to, I should have done something, I should have stood up for myself, whatever it is. We notice the discord within ourselves. We notice that this doesn't feel right, how I'm being with this. And this is a wonderful, beautiful moment, because that is our choice point. Because what happens here is the mind will come in and it will offer solutions for how you can feel better. It will offer you, well, if you would have just done this, if she would have just said this, if you can fix it this way, fix it that way. And some of the solutions that the mind has to offer up are actually good solutions. It's not that they're all bad, but the issue with it is that they're often premature and they don't go to the core of the gift that the conflict has to offer. Because at the core of all conflict, I will say, at the core of all offenses, at the core of all hurts, stems a sense of our not enoughness. Because if we realize the truth of who we are, if we really got it, that there's only one presence, one power, God, the good, omnipotent in every area of my life, and that I am an expression of that, then we would realize there's nothing within us that can actually be hurt. There's nothing within us that can ever actually be damaged. There's nothing within us that can ever be corrupted. And so we might think that we have this not enoughness. If I were only smart enough, if I were only young enough, old enough, skinny enough, funny enough, whatever it is. I could go on and on about all the not enoughness in the human experience, all the ways that humans think that we need to be in order to be enough for this experience of the world that's already freely given. And so what I'd like to share with you in just a moment are some words from Roger Teal about how we can use this conflict and realize that this is striking something at the core of our being. What is this really saying about me? Why am I offended by this? Why am I hurt by this? What is this trying to tell me? Where am I not believing that I am good enough? Where am I not believing that what I have to offer is enough? So if we can open up ourselves to that, we know that there's one answer. There's one remedy for this in this instance of conflict, and that's self-love. And when I read that in Roger's book, I was really kind of blown away with that, about the answer to how to forgive, how to be with conflict, is that the self is calling for more love. It's not calling for you to know better, do better. That will come if it needs to come. And it's definitely not about, obviously, making the other person change. We have no control over that. It's about radically accepting who we are, the wholeness of who we are, and loving ourselves and allowing ourselves to receive that divine love so that we are in a realization of our wholeness, of our completeness. Because when we go out in the world in that state, I don't care what anybody says to you, you're not going to get triggered by it. You're not going to get offended by it. It doesn't mean that you don't stand up and say what's right when it's necessary. But you become more resilient to all the ways that the world will have conflict for you. Because let's face it, we're in a world of 8 billion people that all have 8 different personalities, different opinions, different pet peeves. Conflict is going to happen, right? So instead of trying to avoid it or wish that it weren't here, we can look at how we can use it to create freedom within ourselves from any places where that not enoughness is still hidden. And so I'd like to take the last few minutes of the service just to share some words from Roger, because I think they're just beautiful how they are. So I'm going to read you a little passage. And this is really meant to be an experience. So I invite us to kind of go back into that space that we were when we were meditating a little bit earlier. Arrange your body in a way that allows you to feel both comfortable and supported, both relaxed and aware. If it feels right for you, you might want to close down your eyes. Let's just take a couple of nice deep breaths here. And I invite you to check in with yourself, in with your awareness. Are there any disturbances in your awareness? Maybe a crossword you had with someone, something that doesn't quite feel right, something maybe you need to forgive yourself for. Maybe you've been holding a grudge against yourself or expecting yourself to do something and you're kind of shooting yourself a little bit there. Just notice what's in your experience. Is there anything that you would like to see some softness around? Any relationship you'd like to see some more love, some more light around, anything, places that feel a little dark, a little dim. And so in this moment, what Roger says is the first step is to throw open your heart. Throw open your heart to all the love of God. And let it fill you, let it heal you, let it renew you. If you have any fear around the situation, feel it dissolving in the healing balm of love. And passionately embrace the feeling that you are enough that you have never, ever, ever been inconsequential. You have never, ever been flawed. And anything that has told you otherwise has been a lie. Allow divine love to soothe you, imagining it caressing you at depth. Imagine yourself practicing loving yourself and feeling solid and strong in this love. And see if you can notice if there's any sense of offense that it is dissolving. Because as our sense of being offended dissolves, we will find ourselves emerging out of a trance of unworthiness. We expand beyond fear and resentment. So breathe into that. And ask your inner self, your higher self, how shall I now go forth to express the greatness of my own loving and healing nature? How shall I go forth? And so, my friends, may you find within yourself that capacity to love yourself through every conflict, the bravery to be with every tension, to see the gift that it is revealing to you so that you might know your fullness and wholeness even more fully, even more deeply than you do at this moment. And may you know more than anything that you are loved in infinite ways. Namaste.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.